pleased to see you. My name is Tess Jones. I'm the Director of the Arts and Humanities and Healthcare Program here at the Center for Bioethics and Humanities, and we do have some additional seating back here if people want to take a seat. I have a couple of announcements, as I usually do. If you have not been in the gallery or you plan to make another visit to the Rembrandt, it closes on Friday, December 1. So be sure and keep that in mind. We are now accepting literary and art submissions for the 2018 volume of The Human Touch. So please visit our website, www.coloradobioethics.org, if you are interested in submitting your prose, your poetry, your photography, or your drawing. And we actually also have a music and video option. And next week's Arts in Medicine is one of our most popular, and that is the Anschutz Campus Choir. Their performance is the holiday concert. It is titled simply Joy, and holiday food will be provided. I don't know what that means. Probably cookies. Okay, it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Timothy Standring. He is the Gates Family Foundation Curator of Painting and Sculpture at the Denver Art Museum. In addition to Degas, A Passion for Perfection, which opens in Denver in February 2018. He has curated 12 other exhibitions at the museum, including the internationally acclaimed Becoming Van Gogh, Castiglione, Lost Genius, and I think, oh, it's a tough one, but it was really close. My favorite, The Wyeth, Andrew and Jamie in the studio. He has published many articles for a wide variety of journals on topics that have covered a broad range of subjects, including the art collecting habits of 17th century Roman patrons, monographic studies on European artists, British watercolor sketching, impressionist portraits, contemporary painters, as well as reviews of exhibitions on many artists. Welcome, Dr. Timothy Standring.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Might be, if we close the door, we might have a little bit darker, but please let others in. Isn't it fun being here? Are we all turkeyed out? I'm going to try and give you as much misinformation about Rembrandt as I can in the next 50 minutes. And my intention for all of you to walk out of here is to say, I didn't know that about Rembrandt. So it's not going to be a lot of data. It's going to be interesting things about what Rembrandt was doing as a printmaker and trying to involve how his continuity was with his drawings as well as his paintings. I had a compliment when I was walking out of my Van Gogh exhibition, and the couple in front of me said, "Can you believe it? They didn't even talk about his life." So my exhibitions are the Wyeth, Degas that you will see. You're all going to show up on February 9th when it opens up in Denver, Denver only, Degas, Passion for Perfection. But all my exhibitions are about process, and if you don't know anything about the process, you're missing much about how they would adjust themselves for content. So think about your favorite movie director. Who would that be? What movie director do you like? Sergio Leone. Okay, Sergio Leone with spaghetti westerns. Orson Welles. We all know, and that's basically what Rembrandt is doing. So, dramaturgy. So if you think about somebody who really thought about and read the narratives, this is what Rembrandt is all about. Okay, so before I forget, you're all going to make a pledge. You all think it's financial. It's not. You're all going to tell 10 people about these lectures, and you're going to tell 10 people to come and see this exhibition here before it dissembles. And then what you're going to do is you're going to say, yes, I'm going to go to the Denver Art Museum in September to see this exhibition for Denver only. Only. So we're going to have about 100 impressions. We will have about 12 to 15 drawings, and we will have about 7 to 8 paintings. And it's Rembrandt, painter as printmaker. So we're going to give context to Rembrandt, how he was a printmaker. And the reason for doing this is because a new catalog raisonné of Rembrandt's prints was produced by Jocko Rutgers, as well as Eric Hinderding of the Rijksmuseum. And they compiled a 7-volume catalog raisonné of the new establishment of all of Rembrandt's prints. He made about 300 prints, but there are thousands of impressions. So during his lifetime, he might make a state. So let me move on further here. I wanted to show you how I did research, and how this exhibition came about is for the 3 years that I spent at the Bibliothèque Nationale de France in Paris, I looked at 3,000 pages of Degas' sketchbooks and got to befriend the director of the Rare Book Room at Prints at the BNF. So I said to Vanessa, why don't you show your Rembrandt prints in Denver? It's one venue only. And did you know that there are 4 institutions across the face of the earth that have the largest and most impressive print collections? One is at the Rijksmuseum, one is at the Albertina, one is at the British Museum, and the 4th one is at the Bibliothèque Nationale de France. It was the first collection that was put together of Rembrandt prints in 1667, way before we were born. There was an Abbé de Marolles, and he sold his collection of Rembrandt prints to Louis XIV, and they've sat in boxes for about 3 or 4 centuries. So Vanessa really liked me, and she said, I think we can do it. And we have a contract, and so this is my desk, how I'd pull the prints out. This is the 3 crosses. Gives you an idea of the scale of some of the impressions in the prints, my lenses, my laptop to take notes, my pencils only, and also some of the books, some of the prints are placed into large manuscripts. And I'm going back to Paris for 2 weeks on Saturday to argue my case and request that we dismember these books, because there's 3 very important prints that I'd like to take out so I can show them, and then we'd bring it back, and then they can put it back into the book. The French don't like to do that, but I hope I can be persuasive with Enstrom's chocolates. So it's worked so far. It's interesting, I swim over at Cherry Creek Athletic Club, and I would tell people that I'm doing a print exhibition, and they think it's reproductions. So there's a big misconception that these are not known nor considered as original works of art, and yet that's what they indeed are. That's a little bit too much detail for this group at this point. So let's go to the next one. There's 3 basic methods of intaglio. Has anybody been to Danger Wave food store? Safeway. Okay. And they have intaglio ham, and it's a fancy Italian word meaning cut, intaglio. So it cuts through a copper plate. So there are 3 methods of making prints. And printmaking, by the way, started after armor design. And so what they wanted to do is the armor makers, when they put the designs on the breastplate or the shoulder pads or the arm plates, they wanted to remember the designs. So they rubbed ink into it, put paper on top of it, And that is the beginning of the intaglio. And it started with burins, and then with a dry point, and then with etching. So I'll talk about those three. When you have a burin, there's a little knob on the end of it, and you push the burin forward. And it has actually a diamond head in front of it, and you're constantly sharpening on emery paper or a steel or a piece of stone to keep it incredibly sharp. When you push through that copper plate, you have tailings, like up in Colorado, tailings in the mines. And so these little rubbings of copper rub off, little springy things, and you have to be very gingerly to take that off the surface of the plate, otherwise it will scratch it. And if it scratches it, you can burnish it down. But you don't want that scratch to print. With a dry point, it's like a Bic pen without any ink in it, and you're dredging through the copper, and you're creating burrs. And the burrs are little edges here. This is, everybody see my red dot here, up over here? The one on the top, and it's going to leave a little berm. And that berm is going to hold the ink once you put the ink in that furrow. And depending on which side you have your dry point, you could have a higher berm on the right, or a higher berm on the left. And then the ink is going to be splayed. And the reason why you do that is because it's going to give you a nice, rich middle tone, a nice velvety tone that's sometimes uncontrollable. So the ink can splay across the surface. And then the final one is etching, in which you cover a plate with a wax. And that wax surface, you draw through the wax surface, and you expose the copper. And the notion is that you put the copper plate in a bath. You don't actually put it in a bath. What you do is you build a little berm wall, like a cookie pan, and then you pour the acid in, and it eats away the exposed copper. You take the acid off, and depending on how long you have the acid subjected to the copper, it's going to create either a deeper cut or a less deep cut. So you're going to get different lines here on your etching. So this would be rather gray, this would be very dark, and it shows the 1, 2, 3 from right to left. So, and then it's hugely labor intensive. You then have to remove the wax, you then ink it, then you have to take the ink off the top of the surface of the plate with an Italian cloth, so that the plate is completely white or empty, bereft of any ink. And then you take a damp sheet of paper, which you tamp down with some paper towels. So it's still damp, but it's not dripping wet. You put it on top of the plate. You put felt on top of that, and you push it through the printer, the roller, pull it off, and hang it up. It's not easy, it's labor intensive, and I think Rembrandt, who had such a chaotic life, found his Zen moments in printmaking. It's a slow food art, people. It's slow food at making it, it's slow food at looking at it. And what he did is he had art lovers, he had printmakers who very much knew what he was doing. These are very early prints when he was still in Leiden. And it's very difficult, by the way, to, I'm going to show you the next slide. I'll go back here. That's how big that St. Jerome is, one of his very first prints in 1627. So he's still working with in Leiden. And there's only one impression of it. That's why we have to cut the book apart to bring it to Denver. And if they don't let that, we'll then display it horizontally in a little table. So, and the reason why I bring these 4 impressions is to show you the ragged edge of the lines of the plates. And the point that I wanted to make with that is that they didn't bevel down the plate. That's actually a function of that little wax ball into which you would pour the acid, hold it, let it burn through. So he's basically learning printmaking. We don't know who taught him. He was very much involved in publishers. That's maybe one of the reasons how he got his start in printmaking, and I'll go on to that in a second. But the other point I wanted to make when I was mentioning that he had his Zen moment is that he had hundreds of students who learned how to paint with him, but no students in printmaking. So I think he said, I am getting out of here with the chaos. My horrible life, my financial problems, all of the commissions that I have to produce, it's a pressure cooker. So he would go off into printmaking, and not everything would be successful. Here's the other image, and the reason why we want to dismember that book. Because with this deposition, it's the descent of the cross. You can see it has a nice foggy, grayish character to it. That's because the acid leaked underneath the wax surface and it caused it to be damaged. So there are only 2 impressions of that. And there are, or actually 4, and there are about 10 impressions of the corrected plate. And we want to show them side by side with each other. This was a commercial enterprise in which he worked with a commercial printmaker. There's a painting, is sometimes called a grisaille, at the National Gallery in London. It's Christ before Pilate. There's an example in the gallery over here. It's a very large print. It was commercially produced by Rembrandt in engraving. So you would make a commercial print in engraving because you can get more higher edition. You'd get less of an edition in etching because the plate would wear down. And you'd get an even smaller edition with dry point because the berms would wear down. Sometimes Rembrandt would make counterproofs. So counterproof is that there's still ink in the plate and he would simply print it again. And so he would take a counterproof of an image and sometimes work it over again. The next couple of works I'm going to show you is that he, early in his career, worked with drawings prior to plates. And again, giving context to our exhibition, we're going to have a number of drawings that related to his prints. And sometimes he would use, for example, this drawing from the British Museum of Susanna. He decided to correct her arm, so there's what is known as a pentimenti. There's a correction in the drawing, and used for this. So Rembrandt was not interested in the canon in the 17th century of chasing after an ideal model. His wife, it could be the girl milking a cow down in the farmyard. It would be anybody. He was known for his naturalism, and that's showing up in this early impression of Susanna being espied eventually by the elders. Here's an example in which he has this red chalk drawing with a little bit of white gouache on top of it from the British Museum. And what he did is he superimposed that drawing on top of the wax plate, so the prepared wax copper plate. And then he took a stylus on the back of the drawing and indented the drawing of red chalk onto the wax surface so that he could have a template for the sitter of this portrait. This shows you how dense the drawing is at the British Museum. Here's a number of other pen sketches related to a posthumous portrait. We're going to have this Adam and Eve with a drawing that's coming from the University of Leiden. This is actually his wife Saskia as Eve in this print. It's all based on a prototype coming from Albrecht Dürer. We're going to have this crucifixion with this drawing coming from the Louvre. And we're also going to have this drawing of a hog with this hog here. And this is this is actually a very lovely little drawing because the butcher would be an itinerant butcher. So he'd go around with his knives and say, "Do you need any hogs slaughtered before the winter?" And they'd say, "Yes. Could you do Daisy out there?" Now the little baby over here has sort of football helmet on. That's actually a padded leather head protector so that it's an early bicycle helmet. And usually the children are in these little rollers walking around, but when they learn how to walk to protect their heads, they have these little helmets on. And then the other boy is playing funsy, making fart sounds with a bladder. And it may allude to the brevity of life. Now, a lot of Dutch scholars love to simply talk about the content of Rembrandt's prints. Look at everybody, we're dealing with Shakespeare here. And his ability to produce these images and the resonance that they have with so much meaning. But our exhibition wanted to not only deal with that, which we will in the content, but also wanted to show the working process that he produced prior to making all of these prints. Did you know that Rembrandt also used about 9 different printing surfaces? So he used cartridge paper. So at your Whole Foods or Whole Paycheck, you would get a bag, paper bag, brown paper bag. That's cartridge paper, it's wrapping paper. He printed on that. He printed on Japanese paper. He printed on Chinese paper. And those two are fiber-based. And since they're fiber-based, they would absorb less in the tooth of the surface of the paper. And therefore, the ink would sit on top of it very much like a very low relief. You could rub your finger across it, which I do, but you're not supposed to. And please don't do it at the museum or here. But they're all under glass in any case, but they're like little worms of lines on top of the surface because it doesn't absorb into it. And so it has a really incredible attraction. And keep in mind that his collectors wanted to have these extraordinarily rare impressions. And sometimes when you look it up in close to the light, the surface has a sheen to it and plays off the ink in a magical way that was prized by many collectors. So this just gives you an idea of printing on Japanese paper as against on Western paper. Most of his papers were made in France, although we know that his papers, we can sometimes date his impressions. He might do a print in 1633, such as Susanna and the Elders, but he might take another edition in 1656. Why do we know that? Because we know that from the paper marks, the watermarks on the paper in which he would simply rework his plates. He did not own and control his plates for his entire life. In fact, when he went bankrupt, he gave them to his son Titus to avoid the people to take over. Why did he go bankrupt? He made bad investments. So he either invested poorly in the Dutch stock market. Some people seem to think that he invested in overseas ships that went down. We really don't know, but he did have huge financial problems, which was intertwined greatly with the production of much of his images. So one of the reasons why he may have produced all of these very special rare images is that he could get more money for a print on Japanese paper rather than simply producing 150 on Western paper. Rembrandt was also an avid collector. He had a disease. He was obsessed, and he went overboard in his collecting. And he went to the auctions, and he saw things that were at auction. In fact, there was a Dutch or Portuguese ambassador to the Republic of Holland who purchased this Baldassare Castiglione by Raphael, and he also later owned this portrait of Ariosto by Titian. And so Rembrandt took the two and put them into this archaically dressed, costume dress-up self-portrait. Nobody looked like that in Holland in the 17th century. Now, he also collected extraordinarily rare prints by predecessors, such as Lucas van Leyden, as well as Albrecht Dürer. But as I said, he was a dramaturge, he was a producer, he was a director. So he knew how to take a former prototype from Dürer on the left and then accentuate by reading the Gospels and taking from the four Gospel narratives what were the most salient points of the narrative. And so that's why he places the striking whip of Christ in a highlight in contradistinction to how Dürer had done that. Or the same thing going on in the Birth of the Virgin here, in which he alludes and puts together actually two moments of the Annunciation. This is actually two moments of the death of the Virgin. Did you all know that I'm a crypto-Mariologist? I actually am. I'm going to help you when you go to Starbucks, when you order an espresso macchiato. What does that mean? It means a spotted coffee. So you've all heard of the Immaculate Conception. That's not about Jesus being born. It's about Mary being born from a geriatric couple, Joachim and Anna. Okay, so it was foreordained that Mary would be bereft of a spot on her soul. This is Catholic theology. And Duns Scotus and Thomas Aquinas were two angels on a pinhead arguing about this. How could anybody hold a Godhead in her womb if she was born of original sin? Oh my God, this is horrible. So they solved it by saying that she was immaculately born. The next time you go to Starbucks, you'll have all this Catholic theology. You can order a latte macchiato. A latte macchiato is steamed milk with a spot of coffee. Okay, so at the end of her life, they announced that an angel would come in to the apostles who were all around the world preaching the Gospels. And the angel said that it's imminent, she's about to go into dormition. So many museums, you'll see the dormition of the Virgin instead of the death of the Virgin. At this time, the whole problem of body and soul going up into heaven, which was the second Catholic announcement, which was the Assumption of the Virgin. So at this time, she's just going to sleep. And this is my connection with all of you at the medical school. This guy's taking her pulse and saying, she's about to go, guys. Okay, so all of the apostles flew in miraculously to Tel Aviv airport, and here they are. And so he decided to put other people into this. So he's playing off of prior prints, but he's increasing the drama and taking two parts of the story and putting them together. It's just absolutely brilliant, isn't it? I think so. Okay, now this is the star of the show. I mean, you're all going to put your sandwiches down. Let's go to the real stuff. Look at this is Potiphar and Joseph's wife. Or Joseph and Potiphar's wife. And a former print, rather decorous in the arrangement of it. Potiphar's wife said, Joseph, please sleep with me. And pious Old Testament Joseph said, no, I cannot do that. I would be committing adultery. Now, everybody look at this composition because it's so telling the way Rembrandt had done it. Instead of simply him bolting away, she's holding on to him, but where is his hand placed? His hand is placed so that he will not see her private parts. Now, this everybody, this is the key to understanding Rembrandt. He thought about how can I make this the most dramatic moment of this event that took place. So if you take his eye line, prevented by his hand, placed on her sex in terms of the shadow and direction, that's what Rembrandt was thinking about. I think that's brilliant. I know it's a minor point, and the print is only about 6 by 3 inches. So imagine him communicating to his collectors in such a rich way, and by that time, he's using, of course, there's all these other things going on here, the phallic pole over there, and the way he's shown her completely in our face. It's absolutely brilliant. But let's step back. How did he start all this? He actually started to make very tiny images. This may be his first print of his mother. He did drawings related to that. He did about 30 to 50 small. These are only about 2 inches by 2 inches. Self-portraits. He then began to put them into what are known as tronies. A trony is a fancy Dutch term for a face. And it could be an exotic face. And he wanted to do that. And so we're going to show a number of these paintings with some of these early trony impressions. And then he started to take all the diverse of humanity, wizened men, old women, peasants, and put them into narratives. So the print on the right is the rat killer. And what he's doing is he's selling poison, rat poison. Not the best impression, I apologize. But he also had a side business. He was competing with Dennis Basso of Aspen, selling furs. So that's why you have furs on his shoulder, and his little lackey helper there, landscape in the background, repoussoir barrel here, and then this is the Good Samaritan over here on the left-hand side, the print. And what does he put in the lower right-hand side? A defecating dog. And isn't that the best? It's in there, right? It's in the show. Now, come on, everybody. Isn't this, I mean, humanity. It's right here. And he could have done that for sales purposes just as much as he made about 15 different impressions of early impressions. So in the whole print industry, when you make a state, you work the plate, you print it, and then if you were going to rework the plate, which means you have to re-wax it, work it again, re-etch it, and you have different marks, that's state 2. Rembrandt sometimes would go up to 7 or 8 different states. Degas, by the way, went to 24 or 25. And that he would do all of these states. For example, this one of the so-called Jewish bride, he produced about 17 impressions of it unfinished, because he knew that he had quite a commercial market for doing that. What time do we have? Oh, okay, good. Rembrandt was not simply a printmaker who made individual prints. He also worked with book publishers. So there was a Dutchman who wrote a book about the history of seafaring with a Dutch point of view. Okay, he'd make the claim that the Dutch invented Noah's Ark. It's a joke. And here, what he's doing, he's showing Caesar Augustus after the battle of, was it Actium, in which he defeated Antony and Cleopatra. And so it's an allegorical print in which Janus is in the back side. It's actually taking place in Denver, Janus Funds. Anyway, this is on the shore in Greece, and because Caesar Augustus had defeated Antony and Cleopatra, peace would ensue in the world. Okay, so that the temple of Janus, when the doors were closed, that would suggest that peace exists. When the doors are open, there's wartime. And because he no longer needs this mighty steed, he doesn't have to go to military purposes, that's why the steed is faltering there, and he's about to get off of that. And because of that, Fortune is opening up the sail to allow passage of commerce to take place across the seas. A very Dutch important theme, I think. In fact, they're so happy that this guy's having a Heineken's in the boat over there. Okay, the banter, the way I talk about these prints is very much the way people in the 17th century would talk about these prints, and they would collect them. This is the Annunciation to the Shepherds, and it's one of his first brilliant prints in which he's showing these great contrast in light and dark, light descending, in which you have this complete chaos. You'd think a hurricane is coming in with all of the figures, racing cows, cattle, shepherds. But the way that Rembrandt had built this up is very much following techniques from professional commercial reproductive printmakers. He would do the same thing. In fact, in 1643, he produced the 3 trees. And some people suggest that that may have been done in one whole setting. In other words, one go of the etched plate, and how he would differentiate the darker lines from the lighter lines is depending on how long he would sit the plate into the acid, or as how deep he would have exposed the copper with the lines that he had used. One scholar had actually suggested that he looked at Descartes' book on meteorological research. Is this an imminent storm or is it a passing storm? and you have humanity simply unconcerned, as most Dutch people are. How do you tell the difference between somebody who is, it's like in Windsor Castle, how do you know a resident is at a Windsor at a barbecue? Nobody is a resident in Windsor looks up at the jets going into Heathrow because they know about it. Well, very much in Holland, nobody's concerned about the inclement weather. We in Colorado would be. But there's a little guy sketching over here. There's peasants in their cart moving along. There's a couple fishing over here. And then if you look really closely over there, you'll find a couple making love. It's so beautiful. Same thing here in this cusp of trees over here. He included a couple in this bower of trees. This is the omval, which means in Dutch a ruin, and it's right down from the Amstel Hotel to the left as you're looking south, about a mile away when the river bends. It doesn't look like that anymore, but that's where the site was. Some people have suggested that Rembrandt actually took prepared plates and started them on site. So he would have a prepared wax plate and put in some lines and then finish it in his studio. And then this one, he also began to play around with tone, different kind of inking, which in retouchage it's known as in French, and that's why you have that musty plate tone in the sky up above. We have the 100 guilder print in the exhibition here. We'll also have it in Denver. That was quite an expensive print. There's 100 stuvers in one guild, and that was a terribly expensive print, but it was prized because he was able to merge together dry point etching and a little bit of burin in one state and produce intensely rich images. Sometimes he would leave a little border towards the bottom of it to allow certain individuals to write commentary related to the print itself. We'll also see plates in the 50s, in the 1650s, when he simply reverted to dry point. So the two large crucifixions, 3 crosses, which are about 2.5 feet by 16, 24 roughly by 16. And we're going to see the 4th state as well as the 2nd state on Japanese paper with Western paper to show the comparisons for that. So we need to give a big round of applause to Morton Toby, who lent their collection to the university. And they certainly are part of my putting together the request with the BNF, if we could combine Morton Toby's collection with their collection to create this great exhibition, which is taking place in September 2018. So I've done enough stand-up comedy here, but I'd like to open up the floor to questions.
And when you do ask a question, if you would hold down the little button, it turns red, and speak into the microphone.
Are there any surgeons here? Is that how you sharpen your knives?
Tim, I'm over here behind you.
Tell me.
I just have a question about how much pressure the press actually laid on those prints because of the wearing out and the bending of these very delicate little cuttings.
Well, they would. I can't answer what the exact pressure is. I'm I'm not a printmaker, but if it's too stiff, you just completely destroy the burrs on the dry point. So that's another reason why you have the felt there, so that it would prevent absolute flattening out of that. But all of you, I hope you all recognized how much technical finesse is needed to produce the chiaroscuro, to create the drama and the tension in all of these prints. That they go hand in hand. They go hand in hand. And so as this, you should be going every day, looking at one or two prints before they cart off, and then come back to Denver, to the Denver Art Museum in September, just about 9 months from now. Yes. It's pressed down. Yeah. Yeah.
Can you say something?
Yeah.
You just mentioned that a new catalog raisonné was being published, and many centuries the standard
The standard word
for
is
Rembrandt is Barch, and
Barch,
often
yes.
they're identified with their B number. I chose not to include it because it's a scholarly, I didn't think for our audience very relevant.
Yeah.
But in the works, in the references that do exist, one thing I noticed, and sometimes I just made an arbitrary choice, was that certain pieces that have different titles, depending on which book and which source you're
Right.
looking at.
Right.
So for example, what you called Susanna, the sources that I was looking at called Diana.
I'm sorry, it's Freudian slip. It's Diana. Yeah, sorry.
Another one, for example, as far as I can tell, how, for example, the Great Jewish Bride became the Great Jewish Bride. The other opinion, which is not unrelated, is it's Esther with Ahasuerus's decree.
Right.
So different titles were floating around, and depending on the source you are.
Right. Okay, let me go to the quick. That there is, it's a quagmire on terms of titles for many of these prints, but the first catalogue raisonné was Gerson, a French who put together a list of his prints, and many go back to Gerson. Others, the best book to look at clarification of titles is probably Eric Hinderding in his catalog of the Look collection, which is in Paris, and he goes through constantly many paragraphs of how the titles have changed throughout. So for our labels, we will probably put Diana, possibly Susanna, and then make up your own. Yes, Mark.
Timothy, very nice lecture. Thank you. I hate to continue the going to the content rather than the process.
That's all right.
But I wanted to ask you, have you given any more thought to what's on the top of the staff in Death of the Virgin?
Yes, I have, and I think your suggestion is completely plausible, because it's not a censor. So what Mort is referring to is this, which may have a Jewish connotation to it, which would be?
Well, I think that it's the serpent of Moses. There's a section in the Old Testament where the Jews are wandering through the desert and rebelling against Moses. God gets angry, sends fiery serpents to bite them. Many get sick, some die. Moses intercedes with God, and God commands Moses to make a bronze serpent, mount it on a staff, and show it to the people who were bitten, and those who would look up at it would be cured.
and I contend that that is the head of a serpent in profile.
Right, but then the connection, what's the connection with the
So, yes.
the Dormition of the Virgin?
Yeah.
She didn't die, remember?
Right. It turns out that, well, of course, Rembrandt was a Protestant artist living in a Catholic country.
No, we really don't know his religion.
Okay.
Yeah.
Turns out, though, that he
It's a
lived.
Protestant Catholic country.
Turns out that he lived 2 doors away from the most famous rabbi of the period,
Right. Yes.
Rabbi Samuel Manasseh ben Israel. And he used to go over and get advice on how to do Hebrew lettering and what this story meant, what that story meant. So I believe that he found out about the serpent of Moses from Rabbi Manasseh ben Israel.
No, everything's plausible. But my point is, then how do we weave that into the narrative? I'm not discounting because he actually dealt with his content in an associative way. So that there would be his clients who would understand those allusions that you're making in the print. And that there may have been some kind of discussion at that time that we just don't know the precision of that linkage.
Yeah, I think what Rembrandt is saying is that the doctor taking the pulse, the apostles having hysterics on the side, the learned man reading the big textbook trying to figure out how to save the Virgin, and even the most powerful symbol of healing of the Jews, the serpent of Moses, can't save the Virgin.
There we go. There we go. Very good. Round of applause. No, you had a question. Do you want to press the button and go in the microphone?
Said the collection was stored for 300 to 400 years, and I was curious as to where. And could Morton Toby tell us a little bit about how and why they began their collection?
Okay, the BNF is Louis XIV, so it was a royal collection. So the King's collection of France, and then that became the imperial collection, and then the collection of the nation of France. Number one, that's all their prints are not exactly from 1667 because there are additions in the meantime, but pretty much they haven't seen the light of day. And how Mort and Toby formed their collection, I'll leave that to them.
Well, these are not the same actual prints in our collection that King Louis had. As you realize, every etching has many different reproductions of the same plate. And so some survive, some didn't survive, some are very rare, some are very common. So our collection is what was on the market and what was in auctions.
Okay, so how did we start collecting? We moved from a house that was all glass and had no room for art to a condominium that was over 100 years old and had plenty of room for art. And we had a wonderful dealer, and he was a conniver, but we lived in this condominium that had windows every few feet away, or a foot away, or 2 feet away. And our dealer said, you know, Rembrandts would look very good there to fill in the space because they were the right size. And for a while, you said that the Rembrandts were unattainable for 30 to 40 years. For a while, we kept our collection under the bed. And then when we realized how much other people would enjoy it, we pulled them out from under the bed and start using them for other people's pleasure.
Yeah.
So we have time for one more question, and Joe, you've been trying to get one in there.
Thank you.
Or two. Yeah.
If I understood the process you described, the initial image on the copper plate is printed onto a paper.
Correct.
And if it's true, and as you say it is, then the final image is really the mirror reversed image.
Correct.
and sometimes it has implications. If a person is holding something in the right hand, initially it's in the left hand in the final image. Did Rembrandt ever express any concern or refer to this?
No, but I think in one of his paintings, he included two right arms. In the anatomy lesson of Dr. Tulp. So, sorry? It relates back because he used an anatomy manual from Vesalius from Italy, and so he simply copied it twice. Good question. You had a question, yes.
The reason why it was under the bed was because it ran out of wall space. But in any case, my question relates to the acid etching. Did Rembrandt ever wash the acid off some places and let it etch in other places, or was it just uniformly rinsed? Was there a uniform
good
acid
question.
etching?
I think the question, did Rembrandt ever, let's say, erase? Okay, he would burnish out whole figures. Or he would, burnishing is simply, after the etched lines were made, you can take a burnisher and polish the plate down so it wouldn't print any lines anymore. Does that address it?
But he wouldn't manipulate how long the acid was etched
Yes,
on
he
one
would.
part of
Yeah,
the
he
plate
would.
versus the others.
Yeah, he would let it sit in the acid bath longer to create it. And what happens is that it would just eat and create a much darker, richer line. And the early impressions, they pick up that ink, so it actually looks, and it feels like little worms on top of the surface of the paper. So, wasn't this fun?
It was. It was so fun. Thank you so much, Dr. Timothy
Thank you.
Standring. We'll see you in September, and I want to acknowledge the generosity of Dr. Mort Mower, Dr. Toby Mower, and I'd also like to acknowledge Simon Zalkand, who's here in the front row. Simon is our curator and put together our exhibition, so take a look at it before the end of the week, and we'll see you in September, Dr. Standring, if not before.
Yeah. My pleasure. Deadlines are good. Pull a lot of stuff together. I'm in the middle of writing the essay, so it's, yeah. The exhibition catalog. Yeah.